Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Planning Committee on the 5th of July. We've got 3 applications before us this afternoon, plus a report on a appeal case. So we'll go straight on with the applications. Perhaps I should introduce myself first. I'm the chairman, Councillor Phil Murphy. And officers, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Craig O'Connor, Head of Planning in Monmouthshire.
Good afternoon, Amy Longford, the Development Management Area Manager.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Joanne Chase, Head of Commercial Law and Solicitor to the Planning Committee today.
I'm Richard Williams from Democratic Services.
And finally, Mark Davis, Highway Development Manager for the Council. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, everybody. Move on. Apologies, Richard?
None received, Chair.
Okay, I think, yeah, that's okay. Right, we move on to the minutes of the last meeting. Has anybody got any matters that they wish to raise on those minutes? In that case, can I have a proposal that we accept them? Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Maureen, because you were about to, weren't you? Yes, I thought that. Okay, we'll push on with the applications then.
Declarations?
Oh, yes, sorry. Are there any declarations? Jill? No? No? Okay. Right, so the application that we're looking at first is application DM 2021/01695. It's the creation of one traveller pitch incorporating a static caravan, touring caravan, conversion of existing stable block to a day/utility room, and it's situated in land adjacent to One Rocket Pool, Minutes Lane in Rocket. I understand that Amy is going to make the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So my name's Amy Longford. I'm the Development Management Area Manager. As Chair has just explained, this application is DM 2021/01695 for the creation of one traveller pitch incorporating a static caravan, touring caravan, and conversion of existing stable block to a day utility room. So the application is before members today due to the number of objections received. The application site is located just to the south of the M48, to the north of Roggett. The site forms a currently greenfield immediately adjacent to the existing residential edge of Roggett, as can be seen on the site plan here, identified within the red line. The photographs show the site when viewed from the southern boundary, looking towards the site with the M48 to the rear, behind the treed boundary. This photo shows the southern corner with the existing access to One Roggett Pool and the property to the rear. The hedge and post and rail fence faces the main road. The second slide shows the site looking west with the entrance set back from the road, accessed via Minutes Lane. The grassed area to the front does not form part of the application site. The next slide shows the existing stables on site, granted permission under DM 2020/00026. The stable block shown here is the proposed to be converted to a day room to support the accommodation for those living on site. The next slide shows another view of the stable block in question and the access. So the entrance to the site is recessed from Minutes Lane. The M48 can be seen to the rear of the site, and the fencing here was approved as part of application DC 2017-00753. This next slide shows the stables within the context of the site again. The tree-lined boundary to the rear is to be retained. And the last photograph here shows the boundary of the site with the adjacent residential properties along Roggett Pool. The access to these properties is located on the other side of the fence, as shown on the site plan. If we just skip back a sec. Adjacent to the red line boundary there. So the plans The plans show the existing elevation of the stable block on site, and then the proposed elevations show the rendered walls and the addition of doors and windows to the front elevation under the canopy. And the floor plan shows the proposed internal arrangements of the day room. The next plan here shows the access arrangements to the site as shown on the photograph previously, with the access track set back from the road and planting to the front of the site. The next slide shows the proposed arrangements on site, with the light blue rectangle, the proposed static caravan, with the 2 identified parking spaces in white. The purple shows the existing stables proposed to be converted to the day room, and the pink identifies the location of the touring caravan. The hard standing area is proposed to be compacted, permeable, clean stone, and the retention of the grassed area of the paddock to the northwest. The existing vegetation to all boundaries is to remain. To the west, a 1.8 metre close-boarded fence is proposed to be set back 600 millimetres to incorporate planting to the outside face of the fence. To the southern boundary is a fence proposed to be set back from the existing hedgerow inside the site, and the east, with additional planting, is proposed to in form of native tree planting of hazel, field maple, and crab apple. So a number of objections have been received in relation to different concerns. These concerns are set out below. So in relation to need, the report sets out in detail the requirement of local authorities to provide members of the Gypsy and Traveller community with sites to meet their needs, identifying that sites should be considered in terms of all normal material considerations and ideally located in sustainable locations. In this case, the site is adjacent to an established settlement with a relevant provision and public transport network around it. The legislation refers to need. Whilst the family are not on the Gypsy and Traveller register, they are a family presenting with a local connection due to work provision being in the area and current and suitable accommodation being in Bristol and Cardiff. A search has not provided suitable accommodation elsewhere. Therefore, the site, subject to the usual material considerations, is considered to be suitable for the proposed traveller accommodation. The provision accords with Circular 005/2018. The land is also designated as DES 2, which is Area of Amenity Importance, and it is outside the development boundary. The site is designated as this area of importance, which is part of a wider strip of land between Caldecott Road and the M48. The policy restricts development in these areas subject to criteria, including visual, amenity, recreation, historical and nature conservation. The designation here is intended to provide a buffer to the M48. However, this section of land is to the western end, separated by Minutes Lane, adjacent to the existing residential development. It's also in private ownership with no public access, and the development is not considered to have an unacceptable impact on the site's recreational value. There were concerns over the loss of the impact on the green wedge. However, this is incorrect. The site is not within a designated green wedge for Roggett, which is to the west of the main settlement of Roggett. There are concerns over flooding. However, the site is outside any designated flood zones and is unlikely to flood. The proposed surfacing is specified as permeable, and the application will also require SUD's approval, and the proposed units will be connected to mains drains. There are concerns over the adverse impact on amenity. Given the scale of the development, one family will occupy the site. The separation distances from the adjacent properties are well over the guidance and is not considered to have an adverse impact on the adjacent residential properties, which would be sufficiently harmful to warrant refusal. There is also a condition requiring a lighting plan to maintain suitable levels of lighting. There are concerns in relation to the capability of the adjacent road network. However, there are no objections from the highway officer. The access arrangement and the parking provision is considered to be acceptable. It is also not considered that the development would have an adverse impact on the wider road network capacity given the scale of the development proposed. There are concerns over the adverse visual impact of the site, but when the site is viewed adjacent to the existing urban development, it is bordered to the north by the M48. The site is therefore read in context with the adjacent residential character of the area. In addition, the proposals have been amended to secure additional planting and appropriate fencing to soften the appearance of the site from the main road. There are also concerns over the impact of ecology. However, these have been addressed in the report, and the ecologist is satisfied that the appropriate mitigation and the enhancements have been provided. There were also concerns in relation to property values and animal welfare, but these are not relevant considerations of the planning application. In addition, the intentions of the use of the site in the future are also not part of the assessment of this application. The inclusion of the site as a candidate site will be assessed as part of the development plan process and bears no weight to the consideration of the application before members today. Therefore, for the reasons set out in the officer's report, the application is recommended for approval subject to the specified conditions in the report. There's also a potential additional condition that was raised on site with members this morning in relation to their site visit, which concerns the relation of the height of the hedge to the front of the boundary. It is proposed to add a condition that this hedge shall be maintained at a minimum of 2 metres in height. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I understand that the ward member, Councillor Peter Strong, wishes to address the meeting. Peter, you've got 4 minutes with 2 minutes later on, if you wish. Alternatively, you can take all 6 minutes at the beginning, but you won't be able to come back.
Right, I think I'll take the 6. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I thank the planning officers for their clear and detailed report and for their explanation of how, in their professional opinion or their professional judgment, the committee would be acting within planning guidelines if it approved the application. I note that a number of minor changes have been made to the original application. However, I also note that the report refers to legislation which places an obligation on the authority to consider such applications. Now, consider does not necessarily mean approve. In considering my response, I have liaised with residents who live near the site and with Roggett Community Council. The Community Council has analysed the original and amended versions carefully and have presented several objections, and it's important that their voice is heard and their concerns taken very seriously. Now, let us consider and be clear what we're dealing with here. A large static caravan. In another age, it might have been called a mobile home or even a prefab. A block-built stable, which replaced a wooden stable. So a stable, but no horses, have been kept on that site since it was built. The block-built stable is to be converted into a day room, in effect a permanent extension to the static caravan. And then we also have connections to the main sewer, clearly a permanent arrangement. In other words, what we're dealing with here is, to all intents and purposes, a permanent residential site. It should be treated as such by the committee. I'm informed that previous attempts to develop this site have been rejected, essentially because applications lay outside the terms of the local development plan. And while I accept that that every application is different and that there are special circumstances in this particular case, it remains the case that protections provided by the local development plan still have to be taken into account. Now, reference has been made to the green wedge that we have, rather than a green belt in Roggett. While I accept that the area under consideration is not technically part of the green wedge, it has traditionally, until recent developments, been part of a sort of rural vista provided by that area, because you had open fencing previously. Before the new stable, you had horses at one stage and so on. So it was regarded, to all intents and purposes, as part of what little green wedge we have. And I would say, you know, the area taken has been regarded as minimal by the report, but when you don't have a lot to start off with, you know, every bit's important. Yep. I refer the committee to the MCC Landscape Green Infrastructure holding objection from December 2021. The current proposed development will reduce an area of amenity importance, reduce green infrastructure provision, and have a detrimental effect on the character of the area of amenity importance. And I think these matters have only been partially mitigated by amendments to the original application. I note that the applicants have also proposed this very same site as a candidate site for housing under the process for the revised local development plan, suggesting that having already created what is in effect a residential site, it will be easier for the applicant to get approval for a housing development. This has been referred to by some objectors as gaming the system, a rather loaded term perhaps, but it's hard to escape from what appears to be the logic behind previous developments before this parallel application. So from rural paddock with open paddock-style fencing and wooden stables, to stockade-style fencing and a block-built stable, from this to static caravans and a day room, and then on to permanent housing, with each stage being based on the previous one as justification. Now, the planning report dismisses this as irrelevant, but I suggest this does raise the question of whether this is actually a legitimate application for a much-needed family home or a speculative venture which aims to cash in on the housing market. In this context, I noticed the comment made by the applicant's agent in an email to Roggett Community Council in relation to the candidate site that our client is basically exploring his options on how to use and maximise the land as a planning asset.
You have 5 minutes of your 6.
Thank you. An urgently needed home or a planning asset. I'm not being judgmental here. The applicants are, of course, perfectly entitled to maximise their assets, but equally, the committee is entitled to regard the application in the same light. I don't have time to deal with some of the specifics of the particular plan, but I thank the committee for its time and hope they will take these matters seriously. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There's just a couple of points on what you raised there. Just to remind everybody that we are looking at this application, not any speculative view on what they may or may not be headed for. That would be subject of an entirely different application, and certainly no connection with the local development plan, which is emerging, as the officer pointed out. We don't have anybody responding to this particular point. So can I ask members if they've got any particular technical questions of officers before we have a general discussion on it? Anybody have any particular points to raise? I know we did raise that point about the hedge, but Amy's covered that in her presentation. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I've just written down a few notes after our visit this morning. I've read many of the comments on the portal and within the report, and I take on board the public comments and concerns. As Phil has already said, our job here today is to look at this application on its own merit. We can't look at what could, what should, or what may happen on the site. It is purely what is put in front of us today. We can't speculate about issues such as house prices, the noise or smell, or if the site gets expanded, etc., because these are not planning considerations today. We purely have to go on policy and the application that is in front of us. There is a need for legal traveller sites within the county. This will stop illegal sites popping up and the disruption that these can cause. We need to respect the needs of the gypsy traveller and travelling show people community and that of their culture. They also need somewhere to live, and that somewhere that they can call home, and a safe environment where they can bring up their children. We are looking at a small site, which is one caravan, one touring pitch, which means that that caravan may not be there at certain times of the year, and a day room. There are facilities such as electric, mains water, etc., which are nearby, and the site has been identified as suitable by officers. On looking at the site this morning, I saw that the site is well screened with laurel hedge and a panel fence. Therefore, I feel this would not have a detrimental visual impact from the road or the surrounding area. Furthermore, the nearest property to the site, of which there is a lane in between that property and this site we're looking at today, will retain their privacy because they didn't really have any major windows that were looking out towards the site, and also the orientation of the house meant that they were looking out the other direction. If approved, I certainly would like to see the height of the hedge is maintained to that minimum height. But I would also maybe like to express an interest that the hedge is laurel or something similar that doesn't have the leaf drop. I noticed that hazel was mentioned. Of course, the leaves fall off that. We could see by some of the pictures that were put up earlier that must have been taken when the foliage wasn't out in bloom. So that's just something that we may wish to consider. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think you've raised a valid point there about the species. It would be consistent to carry the laurel all the way around. It's robust. It repairs itself easily if it's damaged, and easy to keep to that height. I've got nobody else has put their hand in the raise hand function. Those who are online, if you do wish to speak, I'll deal with them those in the room now. If you do wish to speak, don't forget to put your raise hand function on. Anybody? I haven't got anybody on my screen, so. No,
yours isn't working.
It's not there. I don't know why, but it's not there. Right, Tony. Oh, it's come up now. No. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions on...
We got there in the end.
Okay, just a couple of questions on technicality. It says that the existing vehicle access will be retained and realigned. Has it already been... Has it already been realigned to highways needs? And the second one is, it says that there's access to the drainage on a point which is already there. What authority would they have with Welsh Water? Is it an authorised point of inlet into the sewage system?
Mark, you have to take the access one.
Thank you, Tony. Chair, in response to the inquiry regarding the access, the applicant has submitted amended drawings that meet our requirements. So on that basis, the existing access will be altered in accordance with if and when the approval is met. It's not significant, Councillor, but the amendments we've requested will accord with current standards for a single access. Okay. Would you like me to comment on the drainage as well? As an engineer, as opposed to a drainage specialist here, if the public sewers are available in Minutes Lane or the B4245, Welsh Water have a duty to enable connection for residential properties. So in that regard, they will have a right of entry into the public sewerage system.
Thanks, Mark. And Jan, you're next up.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a small point about the proposed hedge. You're quite right. The three species mentioned were hazel, field maple and crabapple, and they're all deciduous and they do leave their leaves, lose their leaves. Laurel, on the other hand, I don't believe is a British species, not a native species, but there are other native species such as holly, yew, and perhaps copper beech that might be considered that would shield the property. Thank you.
Perhaps we could take advice from the ecologists and they can see that. Craig, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, just wanted to come back in, thanks, Chair, and to Councillor Easton with regards to the access. You have made a good point there in terms of we should condition the amended scheme access is constructed and erected as such prior to the beneficial use of the site. So I suggest that we do add that as a condition so that the access is constructed as highways are satisfied with and before the static caravan is occupied, so before the residential use starts. So I do think that is an appropriate way to proceed in that manner. With regards to the public sewerage, we did consult Welsh Water in terms of connection, and they have outlined they're going to be connecting to the public sewer. So the highways Welsh Water haven't raised any objections with regards to that. So the potential is there for them to connect to public sewerage. And with regards to Councillor Butler's concerns with regard to landscape, that's certainly a conversation that we can have. There are conditions on in relation to landscape, and we can potentially look at, again, some amended landscaping on the plans before we issued any decision that the Planning Committee wanted to make.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Marianne?
Thank you, Chair. I noticed on the portal that there was a previous application in 2018 at DM 2018-01246 for a construction of 2 3-bedroom detached dwellings, but there's no decisions made on that. I was just wondering if there was any information on that. Also, I note quite a few comments on the use of generators on site. Is there a condition for no use on that at all, or are they being directly connected to the mains electricity? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marianne.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, the application you referred to for the 2 dwellings, it was withdrawn, so no decision was made. The application was withdrawn. And in relation to the generators you mentioned, that's an environmental health issue, so it would be controlled through that separate legislation. So
however, the fact that it's going to be connected to the mains, there shouldn't be any need for generators. I know there was a concern about muck heaps. There's going to be no horses kept there, so that shouldn't be an issue either. That's my understanding, anyway.
There is a grass paddocked area, and they could potentially use that for a horse. It's the same way that anyone could use a bit of land for a horse. Yeah, but that isn't a major consideration as part of this plan application.
But again, if they did cause a nuisance there, that would be environmental health anyway, wouldn't it? Does anybody else have any points? I got nobody on my screen. Right, well, officers have recommended this for approval. Can I have anybody wish to recommend approval of an alternative decision? Yeah. Jane?
Yes, I'll recommend it for approval.
So just to be clear, so this is approval with the condition attached.
This is approval with that condition attached. And just to repeat it, it's that the laurel hedge should be maintained at a minimum of 2 metres. And that we could add that we go to the ecologist for.
Yeah, I think we're probably thinking the same thing. I think it might be good to add to that condition that specifications of the landscaping will be submitted to us, so they would take on board your comments in relation to species and hedging. There's potential, if members would like to have the minimum height of the hedge at 1.8 metres instead of 2 metres, possibly more reasonable in terms of height and scale on the streetscape there. So just to clarify that the landscaping details will be submitted in relation to species, and that the hedge will be maintained in perpetuity at a minimum height of 1.8 metres. Oh, and the access will be constructed in accordance with the approved plans prior to the beneficial use of the site.
Is everybody happy with that? But Anne Webb's put her hand up, so Anne, can you come in?
Only just merely to second the proposal made by Jane, Chair, to approve the application. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So we've had a proposal that we approve the application. It's been seconded. Can we have the vote function up, please, Richard? Okay, would you like to vote now, please?
So that's been approved.
Okay, thank you, Joe. In that case, then we move on to the next item, which I'm going to alter the schedule on so that Councillor Strong can continue with what he was saying. So we'll go to DM 2022/00557, which is the proposal for a new car park to be constructed on land to the south of Seven Tunnel Junction Station, the land at Seven Tunnel Junction for the creation of the car park, Station Road, Roggett. Peter, as we said before, you have the option of 4 minutes plus 2 to sum up, or 6 minutes, whichever you wish. You're on now? Yeah, sorry, we'll do the presentation. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Apologies, I was just trying to load the slide in the right place. Yes, so thank you. This application is DM 2022-00557 for land at Seven Tunnel Junction, a construction of a new car park. So the application is before members due to an objection from Roggett Community Council and from members of the public. So the site is located to the south of the existing Seven Tunnel station at Roggett, accessed off Station Road off the B4245 through Roggett. The red square here shows the position of the station in relation to the wider road network. The site is designated as DES 2 land, which is areas of amenity importance. And although the site is accessible to the public given its former uses, its current condition and its location adjacent to the train line is not considered to positively contribute to the amenity of the area or be an obviously usable or inviting space. The benefits of the proposed use as a car park to support intermodal sustainable transport is considered to outweigh the loss of any amenity. The site is also outside the development boundary. However, given the proposed use, again, the policy supports the development of sustainable transport networks and is therefore justified under Strategic Policy 16. So the next slide shows an aerial view of the site in relation to the station and the immediate environment. The car park is the area of brown open space, if I can see my mouse. Here, directly to the south of the line. The car park will be accessed via the road bridge to the west and then turning east towards the site. So coming over the road bridge and into the site. So the next slide shows the general layout of the car parking, proposing 172 parking spaces laid out in banks running across the site with electric vehicle charging to the west. The next slide shows the landscaping layout to the site, showing green buffers to the south and the north of the site. The proposals will require a SUDS application, which will ensure that sustainable drainage from the site is provided. So this slide shows the additional section of shows the additional section of footpath to the northern edge of the road bridge, providing full pavement access across the bridge from the proposed car park to the existing car park adjacent to the station. This land is outside of the application site, however, it is within the council's ownership, and therefore there is a condition ensuring that the additional pavement provision will be provided prior to the beneficial use of the new car park. So these slides show the 3D visuals of the proposed car park within the existing setting, providing planting and permeable parking areas adjacent to the station on the south side. Again, the next slide shows the sections through the car park with the train line to the left-hand side, and again, the plan in context with the station. So there have been a number of objections to the site, mainly focusing on the highway's impact of the car park and the vehicular and pedestrian movements to and from. The application has been fully considered by the highways officer, who raises no objections over the development as proposed. In relation to traffic movements, concerns have been raised over the suitability of the local road network and the suitability of the bridge. The highways officer is satisfied that the projected traffic flows will not coincide with peak hour traffic flows on Station Road, and that they consider there is sufficient visibility from both directions over the road bridge for cars to pass safely. In relation to pedestrian safety, an addition of the increased section of footpath as shown and conditioned is considered to meet the minimum standards and desire lines from the car park to the bridge. It is considered that this provides suitable and safe provision for pedestrians crossing the bridge in either directions. Concerns have also been raised over the suitability of the site for a car park, citing possible provision elsewhere. However, this application will need to be considered on its own merits and not whether there may or may not be provision elsewhere in the future. The application before members today is what is being considered and not alternative sites. Concerns have been raised over the suitability of the traffic information provided. However, highways officers are satisfied that this is sufficient and that it is appropriate to make an informed assessment. Concerns have been raised over construction traffic potentially causing nuisance to residents. So whilst it is acknowledged that disruption may occur during construction, a construction traffic management plan has been conditioned to minimise the impact of this disruption and manage traffic during the build. Questions have been raised over the management and opening times of the proposed car park. However, as Monmouthshire County Council will own and manage the car park, this will be more easily managed. The car park is intended to be open 24 hours, with prices and charging will be at the discretion of the council, and if the car park becomes misused, appropriate measures will be taken to manage its more appropriate use. Overall, the application is considered to be beneficial to the wider transportation network and encourage the use of more sustainable forms of transport, reducing overall car dependency. The site has a limited use at present and is considered that the more appropriate and beneficial use will have a much wider public benefit. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the detailed conditions outlined in the officer's report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And Peter, you'd like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly all happening in Roggett. Once again, I thank the planning officers for their detailed reports, which acknowledge the concerns raised by Roggett Community Council and other residents, and also for their willingness to engage with members of the community at the site visit this morning. I note that some small changes to the scheme have been made in response to concerns raised, notably a commitment to improve pedestrian safety over the road bridge that crosses the railway line, and that will have to be done before the proposed car park becomes operational. Nevertheless, many of the Community Council's concerns remain. The key issue is that the proposed car park, if needed at all, is in the wrong place. It's in the wrong place because, being south of the railway, it does nothing to draw traffic away from the heavily populated Station Road and can only be reached over a very narrow road bridge, which is one way or single lane in some cases, or in part of it, and also involves traffic leaving the NCP car park using a three-way junction with extremely poor visibility, leaving a severe danger of collision. It's almost a daily, or near misses, or an almost daily occurrence on that site. I also want to address the question of whether the proposed car park is needed at all. I do note the penultimate bullet point on section 6.9 of the planning report that states that the overall need for an additional car park is not the subject of this application, on the grounds that the report only needs to consider whether the scheme meets the planning criteria in terms of the local development plan. However, a significant part of the report attempts to justify the scheme precisely on those grounds, that is, grounds of overall need, by arguing that additional spaces are needed. In particular, it argues that these additional spaces are needed in order to minimise on-street parking. Now, I suggest that on-street parking is not a product of insufficient spaces within the existing car parks. It is rather due to the fact that some motorists are unwilling to pay for parking and so park on the street instead. Members of the committee will have noted on their site visit this morning that there are currently plenty of parking spaces. When I visited at noon last Wednesday, there were 50 empty spaces in the NCP car park, not counting the disabled spaces, none of which were in use, and only 30 cars in the MCC-RCC car park. So putting the two together, around half the parking spaces were empty. Given this, the need for additional parking spaces seems to be largely predicated on the view that there will be significant growth in the use of the station. This is unproven. The forecasts for growth were made pre-pandemic and therefore could not take into account the new normal, whereby many more people are working from home. The planning report states there is an absence of contradictory studies. This is because it's too early to tell. It will be a while before proper studies can take place to identify long-term trends in either direction, the new normal or back to the old one. So in this case, we cannot take absence of evidence as evidence of absence. It is also important to see this proposal in relation to other schemes and the committee are well aware, I think, but it seems likely that the mega walkway station will become a reality before too long. There are also proposals for stations in East Newport and elsewhere, all of which will take passengers away from Severn Tunnel Junction. I note that in support of its rejection of the local development plan's presumption against development in areas of open countryside, which applies to the area south of the railway line, section 6.1 of the planning report quotes LDP policy MV5, proposals for new or improved public transport facilities, especially at railway stations, will be permitted subject to detailed planning consideration, but that such facilities should make provision for modal interchange between walking, cycling, buses and motor vehicles, and that the ethos of the development seems to enhance modal interchange facilities and encourage the use of more sustainable options in the interest of climate change. I have to say this seems a rather overblown assessment of what is, after all, actually just a car park. It does nothing to encourage the desired modal interchanges between walking, cycling and buses, and would only encourage more modal interchange between cars and trams and trains if we accept that more car parking spaces were needed in the first place, which we do not. All of this has to be taken into context of an additional and surely better scheme proposed by Transport for Wales for the link from the M48 and M4 and B4245 to the north of the station, which would draw traffic off of Station Road and also out of other parts of Roggett as well in some cases. So I thank the committee for its time and trust it will give these points serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. There were quite a few points there that you raised. Do officers want to come in on any of those points before we go on?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Strong. There was a number of comments and points that you've made there with regards to the development as a whole. I think with this proposed development, we do really have to look at Welsh Government's vision in terms of transport strategy across Wales and across the Cardiff Capital Region in terms of the shift for more sustainable modes of transport and for the majority of journeys by people to be conducted on public transport, walking and cycling, and this development actually helps enable that as part of the wider region. And it's certainly a part of the Burns Commission report and the work that Transport for Wales are doing to try and ensure that we do have that modal shift. And it is a culture change. It is about ensuring that we have the right facilities to enable that to happen. And this is what this development is trying to do. It's trying to create the environment where that culture change can happen and enable people to commute to that site, to get onto the train network and increase the amount of train journeys ultimately. So there is a number of pieces of work and research which underline this development proposal in terms of the Burns Commission report, moving away from the private vehicle, which was obviously the proposal with the M4 Relief Road. So this is certainly trying to underpin that in terms of the development proposal. Obviously, Councillor Strong, you've picked up on the fact that within the plans there is now a clear pedestrian link from the car park to the train station to the north. And as members are aware, and as was discussed on site this morning, in terms of context, there are wider proposals which aren't part of the planning application today, but to produce a footbridge at a later stage, which would be subject to further consents and funding requirements. So those links are potentially future projects to come. So what we are looking at today is this planning application in isolation. As I said, it is working within the Welsh transport strategy and Welsh planning policy by looking at the transport hierarchy and trying to create that modal shift. Fully appreciate some of the concerns with regards to the traffic on the bridge in terms of the railroad, as highways officers have outlined in the report. This has been given due consideration and we are exploring as part of the road safety audit ways to widen that road potentially or have priority access in either direction at that point where it does narrow. But overall, highways officers and obviously Mark Davis, my colleague, can speak for himself really in terms of have no objections to the proposed development as it is submitted at the moment. I think I've covered off the main points there, but if there's anything else that people want to ask during the conversation, then obviously happy to help.
Okay, thanks for that, Craig. Before I bring members in, there were some points there that might directly concern you. Mark, do you want to pick them up now or wait for questions? probably easier
if
you
I
pick
could,
them
Chair,
up
I'll
now.
pick them up. I'm sure members have specific questions as well, but I would like to take this opportunity to familiarise members with my role in determining applications from a highway perspective. I operate totally impartially. I know it's a Monmouthshire County Council application, but I've treated it no differently if it was an outside body submitting this application. My role here is not to defend or support the application. My role is to determine whether this application would be detrimental to the safety and capacity of our network and to ensure it accords with our current technical and transportation policies. And in determining this application, I've encouraged the applicant to promote additional changes, additional reviews, and on the basis of the application submitted, I am unable, much to the annoyance, I'm sure, of the community, to support an objection to this application. So I just wanted to make that clear before we open up discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Go to members who've put their hands up now. Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I sat on the Old Area Committee for Sevenside and the Strategic Working Group for many years. One of the biggest bugbears of bringing Severn Tunnel Junction back into a feasible and a proper railway station was to respect the village of Roggett. It's always been a problem getting the traffic into the station through Roggett. And over the last number of years, this particular scheme has come up via a private sector enterprise. I can't remember the name of the company, TransUnion, I think, where they were going to look at having links off the M4 to this car park. And also, part of it, they would create the footbridge off the car park onto the new footbridge there is, not a car park, and then we look at add-ons later. But that's to me, that's the position we are with this particular this planning application. Sorry, the aspirations of Caldecott, Roggett, and Mega has been to have a link off the M48 down to the B4245 and link down towards the Severn Tunnel Junction to clearly get rid of the traffic in Roggett Town, in Roggett Village Centre, because that's been a bugbear all along. The road is bad. It may, from highways perspectives, be satisfactory, but for the people who live there, it's a no-no. And of course, as Councillor Strong states, that a lot of people park there because they park for free. There was an attempt to have a small car park adjacent to the allotments below Severn Tunnel, but that never solved the problem of the Roggett Village. I'm of the view that we need to process links off the M48, which was mentioned in the Burns report as an aspiration, whether it should be a single link or double link or whatever, but that would have led to the B4245, hence creating a position where the traffic off the B4245 and other traffic coming into the area would be kept out of Roggett Village. So I believe that this application is a bit too late in the stages where it's needed, because the private sector investment doesn't seem to be coming forward. We've got to look, as far as I'm concerned, to protect the people of Roggett. And my view is that we should be pushing for proper link of the B4245, the M48, and create the car park out of the way of the Roggett Village. I call it town, sorry, but Roggett Village, because that has been a bugbear for the last 10, 12 number of years since Stag created the lobby group to recreate a good station at Roggett on Severn Tunnel. It's a good station. It needs to be used, and I do agree that there will be competition from Lamwyn Station, Mega Walkway, and maybe the other side of Newport, well, I think the one in St. Manners. It's going to have to compete with all those. To make it compete, we've got to make it viable for people to get there easily without affecting the people in Roggett. So I think we should be looking further ahead than this particular car park. I don't think it's needed personally at the moment. It may be in the future, but at the moment I don't see any need for it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. It was beneficial to visit the site this morning and to meet with the community council members on site. An expansion of the site with the metro plans and therefore the increase in rail users means that more parking will be necessary. The site has been deemed suitable by officers, whilst I acknowledge that suggestions were made to put the car park in a different field, which was on the other side of the station. And we have to remember that we are looking at the application that we have in front of us today. There is no guarantee that the landowner of the field will sell it. So we need to look at the site that is before us. You know, it is a bit of a chicken and egg situation because we need to have the planning permission for the car park to get funding, and hopefully if both are approved and gained, then we will see a footbridge built, as Craig has mentioned, and that will therefore alleviate any concerns regarding the street lighting and the distance that commuters and rail users will have to walk. I hope that this site, if approved, will alleviate the parking that happens around on the streets. You know, I hope the measures will be put into place, such as fair car parking fees and residents-only parking, although that is not something that we're here to look at today. By 2030, the sale of petrol and diesel cars will cease. We therefore will have to look at the future. I believe that there are 26 electrical vehicle charging points proposed, but I do wonder whether this is enough, considering that the capacity is for 172 vehicles. If commuters are working in Bristol, Cardiff, Newport, etc., they're likely to be away for a minimum of 8 to 9 hours if you take the sort of 9 to 5 type working pattern. And therefore, if people are charging their vehicles, those vehicle charging points are likely to be taken up largely during the working day. Therefore, maybe more charging points would be necessary, and possibly a mixture as well of rapid charging points and also slow charging points. And hopefully the local community will also be able to benefit from the rapid charging points and come and use them. So aside from that one question of is that enough charging points, I have 3 other questions, which are, will solar be used to light the car park? Will disabled and child spaces be available? I assume they'll be in the original car park on the other side of the road. And are there bike racks in order to encourage active travel? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Do any officers want to pick up on that before I bring Jill in?
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. Number of questions there. EV charging, it is a policy requirement that from Planning Policy Wales that 10% of car parking schemes will provide EV charging. So as part of this scheme, I believe there's 10 EV vehicle chargers, and then there's going to be an additional 16 being presented later on. But if members were minded that that 10% policy compliance is needed now from the outset, again, we could condition that 17 are put in as a condition, so it does meet that policy requirement. I did have a conversation with you, Councillor McKenna, about you know, increasing that provision even further in terms of that requirement. But as the policy is 10%, I think it would be wise to go with what that planning policy is. If in the future additional demand goes up for electric car charging, as in all car parks, it's in the council's gift to deliver more. So I think that is an ongoing conversation. But if members are minded to approve this today, I would suggest that if Councillor McKenna is suggesting that we would condition 10% of the parking provision is put over for EV charging. In terms of solar, I don't actually have that answer to hand, but I don't think there is a proposal for solar renewables on this site. Street lighting would be via the electric connection to the system, so there's no solar as far as I'm aware in terms of this planning application. Disabled parking, that would be a conversation with Network Rail and NCP on the northern side. The long-term solution is to have disabled parking in that northern car park. So if this does come forward, then there would be a shift from the disabled parking to go into the north area, and the south would then be for the more able people who obviously can walk that way, and hopefully when the footbridge comes they'll be able to go over that side as well. So that is all up for discussion as things move forward, but it has been considered as part of the proposals. In terms of Councillor Easton, your concerns with the application, I appreciate that you were talking about the junction and the potential discussion and consultation on the northern car park. This proposed development, as we've discussed, needs to be considered on its own merits. It doesn't mean that proposal will not come forward as well. So that junction and that northern car park can still come forward. The Welsh Transport Strategy is and the vision for Welsh Transport across the region is for a direct shift into public transport, with 45% of journeys being in public transport. So both car parks are justified. So it might be that that proposal does come forward. But planning committee members today do need to be mindful that we can only look at what's in front of us. Those other projects, other schemes, are not before planning committee today and might not ever come forward for the reasons that Councillor McKenna did mention in terms of land ownership, funding, etc. So I hope that's answered all the queries. EV charging, there's potential for policy compliance in terms of a condition. There is no solar on the site at all, and they will be connected to the mains in terms of electricity, and disabled parking will be in the north.
So could I just ask about the bike racks as well? That was one other question. To encourage the active travel.
Yeah, I can answer that one. Yeah, there isn't any provision as in the landscaping plans for bike racks, but again, if members wanted to have those, we could condition that those could be added. Just to add in relation to the lighting, there is no solar, as we've mentioned, but also it's designed to have quite low-level lighting because of the ecology and the bats as well, so that is supposed to be on quite low bollards, so light spill and light pollution is being at a minimum. Mark, did you want to comment on the bike racks?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there if I may, Chair and members. Yes, should always provide plenty of adequate parking for cycles. I don't think it's appropriate on the site in question, but that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't canvass Network Rail to provide more if and when is required on the northern car park where it is more accessible and more likely to be used. So I think it's a valid point. I don't think it's appropriate for this application, to be perfectly honest, but in terms of the Severn Tunnel Junction provision, I think it's required. I'm sure there's parking provision there at the moment, or cycle stands, but as and when the demand increases, I'd like to see the facilities increase in line with that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Jill.
Thank you, Chair. I have concerns over this application, taking it as it is without looking at any other application and with respect to only this application. I totally applaud the need to produce a modal shift and for us all to start using the trains and the railways and public transport more. My concerns are based in there's only one access road, and I often go to this station, and it is that three converging roads coming together is an issue now. Just normal, just accessing the station. So it's going to be much worse. Even if you widen the road, it's going to be a problem. It is a problem now. It is every time you go to that station, you stop and you're wondering what's coming over the bridge. So that is a real issue, even if you widen that road. So I have real concerns over that. And currently, the road, the footbridge is not a given. It's not part of this application. Therefore, it might not happen. And therefore, you might have a car park there, which me as a female and any other person, low-level lighting, I will not be using it. I would not be using it because it's such a long distance, and it's open, and you'll be walking across that bridge, which is open to the elements. It's not going to be used. It's not conducive to encouraging people to use that. I'm not against the scheme itself. It's the access road. That is a terrible converging of three roads now without the additional traffic. And that's in my experience. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jill. I know you've got some specific thoughts on that, Mark. Were there, in the consultations that you're ongoing, were there any provisions for lighting of the on the bridge or something to improve that safety factor?
In answer to that, Chair and members, there is no provision, but that doesn't mean to say the road safety audit, which will be undertaken outside the planning process, but more as a highway requirement. All highway schemes require safety audits. That is currently ongoing at my request. That may determine that the access road and the footways will require lighting, but I'm not preempting that. I'm going to wait for the outcome of that, and if that is a requirement, we will look to provide it as a requirement of the safety audit. Talking about safety as well, a number of members have mentioned, and I'm going to reiterate, I'm not here to promote or endorse this application. But from a road safety aspect, I understand members' concerns regarding the junction. I've taken the liberty while we've been talking to look at our safety data for that location. That junction has no recorded accidents in the last 23 years. That doesn't mean to say I know what members' concerns are, but in terms of road safety, that's what I have to look at. And I think what we're looking to implement by widening the footway, providing the footway, provides a safer environment. And that's what I have to determine it on. But I understand the members' concerns, but we have to look at data and stats and the actual cruel reality of things.
In response to that we're talking about increased traffic flow. So it's not realistic to look at, I would suggest, to look at past information.
In response, Chair and the local member, as I said, as detailed in our response to the application, and as I mentioned on site this morning, and I believe one of the members may have already mentioned this, that it is very much a commuter location. They're catching the trains predominantly to Bristol and further afield, stopping in London. Most commuter traffic arriving at this site, and the data supports this in terms of the access statement that was submitted in support, that that vehicle movement will be well before the peak hour traffics that are experienced on the local network in Roggett and the B4245. So the traffic that will be there will be already in the area. Rather than parking on the local streets, it is hopeful that it will park in the car park provided. So it will not be coincident with, for instance, the peak hour traffic associated with the school, which is between 8 and 9 p.m. 9 a.m. p.m. That's the late school time, isn't it? 8 and 9 a.m. Yeah, and it won't be coincident with which is the busiest time for a school, is the p.m. pickup. So it will never be coincident with that, in my opinion, and the data supports that as submitted.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say that I'm not the local member? Okay, just to put it straight.
My apologies, Chair, and my apologies.
Okay, Ben.
Thanks, Chair. I think I probably feel the same way as a lot of members here, that there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing going on with this proposal, whereby we want people to start, you know, kind of park and riding, take some of the strain off the motorway maybe, but many pieces of a jigsaw have to come together to make that a reality, and we can only control a small portion of that. And this is one of those things we can control. We need somebody else to extend the footbridge, I think, to make this work. I don't think this car park will work particularly well without the footbridge. As Jill has said, it's a long way round on the bridge to get to the station on what is currently an unlit bridge, and a commuter coming home, I think it wouldn't be very pleasant. I did have a question about the parking fees. We were there today. What time were we there? 10:30, around that kind of time. The car park was probably, on a weekday, it was probably a quarter full. If you take the northern car park plus the community council-owned car park. Now, I know there's different parking fees at either of those car parks. And one of the things that's keeping people away from commuting by train at the moment is the cost of train travel. I think the cost of parking is part of that. MCC intends to charge for this car park. Is there an option? Does this committee have the gift to stipulate that, for example, the car park must be very cheap or free for people to use in order to encourage them to use the train?
No, I'm sorry, Ben, that's not within the remit. MCC will be managing the car park, and if they need to take measures to promote it by altering the charges, that's within the gift. And I'm sure that'll come up in the scrutiny committees at the appropriate time. I can see that happening quite clearly. Yeah. Do you want to go?
Councillor Call, I just wanted to come back in terms of this conversation about the chicken and egg, I suppose. I appreciate that complexity in terms of the context of the footbridge coming in and the pedestrian link, which is dedicated now to the train station from the proposed 7 car park that's before you today. But I suppose what I would suggest is that this is an application which is in the council's gift to deliver this development proposal. We can deliver these 172 spaces to ensure that we move that modal shift in line with Welsh Government's public transport proposals to get that strategy to get away from the private vehicle. If members consider this proposal not to be appropriate, then obviously that's the opportunity is lost today. And all those other, the Northern Car Park, the discussions that Councillor Leeson mentioned, or the junction, they're not a reality at the moment. This, before you members today, is a reality. The funding is in place, and obviously that is within your gift to deliver that, to help assist Welsh transport strategy to deliver more sustainable modes of transport. So I want to make that point really, because it is a bit chicken and egg, and I appreciate that. There are other projects that sit outside of this which show the whole picture, but I think for members today this is an opportunity to deliver a project which really delivers on sustainable transport and has been evidenced not to have a harmful impact on highway impacts, with a dedicated pedestrian link and the road safety measures that Mark Davis has outlined, and now this is a decision for members ultimately, but I do appreciate the complexity of the chicken and egg aspect of it.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Jed. I wonder, is there a way that we can speak to TfL and say, look, if we build this car park, will you build the bridge? Or, or whoever's responsible for the bridge? Because that would certainly, provide a lot of reassurance that something might be made.
I can assure you all those conversations are being had now, and obviously this is a part of this decision today. Chicken and egg, if planning consent is granted, then obviously those conversations can further. I can't relay any promises or sit here and say that is going to be delivered, but I can assure you those conversations are being had with Transport for Wales.
Quite frankly, it's the only thing that makes sense, doesn't it? We are being asked, though, to take a leap of faith, if you like, in that the strategy will lead to the demand being there, and if the demand's there, then the footbridge gets there, and you can see it going from there. Maureen.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I wasn't with you this morning, but I do know of the area and where it is. And I'm looking at it from just an overall position, really. It's no good saying, well, there's not many people using it at the moment, so we won't bother to put a car park. I think there'll be a lot more people using it. And going back to those who say, oh, everybody's working from home now, I'm talking to a lot of people, in our area anyway, who have been working from home, and we're glad of it in the COVID, but they're going back. Not particularly every day, but they are going back several days a week now because they find that it is far better. They can't do everything online. So I think people will go back to going to work. So therefore, we want to look for places. I mean, I don't know what you get down there, but up in my area, one of the main problems in my ward is the fact that people park up the residential streets because there's not enough room for car parking at the station, and we'd welcome with open arms if we could have a big car park there. And I think, we've got to look to the future. I think more people will be abandoning a lot of road journeys, partly because of the price of fuel and partly because it's better for the environment. I think we've got to look to the future. We can't say, well, that we don't need it, there's many people there now. There could very well be people in the future. And I think it's, you've got to take the chance when you've got it. It's no good saying afterwards when people are clamouring for it, oh, I wish we'd built that car park back then. So I think you have got to look forward. And obviously it'll improve if we had that bridge. But the improvements can be done as you go along. You've got to start somewhere. So I will say I'm in favour of it.
Okay, thanks for that. I think this is one of those situations where it's unusual to be able to put in the infrastructure before the development. It's usually the other way around. Emma.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to voice many of the other people here really in saying that if this is granted approval today, I'd like to see clear and safe passage both through the car park itself and to the current pedestrian route over the bridge, but also to the potential footbridge. If we think that this is could potentially happen. Could we also incorporate a safe footpath through the car park and to where the footbridge might end up at the same time, so we're not trying to do it retrospectively once it's done. But yeah, really a clear, lit, safe pedestrian route, as safe as we can make it really in both directions. And I'd also agree with the bike parking. I think bike parking is essential, but not on this side. I don't think people would park their bikes this side of the bridge. Thank you.
I think the bike parking needs to be with the disabled parking in the northern end, and of course, if this planning permission doesn't go through, then of course we don't need footbridge or pedestrian links or anything else, do we? Jan.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Jane McKenna has actually asked a number of the questions that I wanted to ask, and Craig has then advised us accordingly about the EV points. I don't know enough about this area, about the local housing. As an electric car owner myself, I'm very lucky in that I've been able to put a charging point on my driveway. I don't know whether the housing in Roger is the same, whether people have got that opportunity. And my guess is that some of them haven't, they don't have front. So if we are putting charging points in and we put more charging points in, I think it would be an asset to the people of Roger. But my other question is actually I'm rather lucky in that I get an overnight rate for electricity. Can we provide a different rate for overnight electricity so that the local residents can benefit from it? And just posing a question, really. Thank you.
That's probably an option which the Highways Department will have a look at when they look at the car park provision anyway. But it's certainly not a planning issue. Marion.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to the SUDS plan, I guess, are you creating any sort of rain gardens in that? And is there any sort of plan for tree planting or anything to offset any carbon emissions, etc.? I also note that it's a relatively new bridge going over there. Was there any consideration given to the car parking when that was constructed? I don't know how long ago, maybe is it 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, I don't know. And also, I don't know if it's been mentioned before, but bus links. I know we had a conversation on the journey this morning about bus links to the station. Is there any provisions for a drop-off with the bus routes that are along there? Thank you.
Mark, do you want to comment on the buses?
Not particularly, Chair. It's slightly outside my remit, but I'm sure, and I believe my colleagues in transportation are actually promoting this scheme, so I'm sure they've considered that. But I think all the members have alluded to the new link, which would be the most direct sort of bus link. To all that's in the future, if that makes sense. Doesn't negate the possibility of a bus service being provided to the car park. I do question why there isn't one now, so that's probably more a demand-led issue, which it probably sits again outside the application in front of us. So hopefully I've sort of clarified that. Regarding SUDS, that's subject to a separate application through. Sorry. Oh, my apologies, it's been approved, so I don't know the details of that. I'm sure my planning colleagues would, so I'm going to hand back over if I can.
Okay, thank you, Mark. You haven't come up on my list, Dale, but I can see on the screen you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If the planning application is approved, would there be a need for a construction management plan? Because all of the construction and traffic would be accessing down Station Road, which is obviously a housing area. So I just need to clarify that there will be a construction transport management plan in place before the application begins. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, it is one of the conditions, so there will be a construction management plan. Jill, you've got your hand back up?
Yes, please, Chair. So I just want to say the concept is really good, and I agree with all the benefits that people have spoken about already. And it'd be good to have a joined-up approach with the bus service. I completely had an open mind when it came to this because I wanted it to happen, but my big concern is that junction. And unfortunately, I don't think the proposals are going to solve the issue that is there. And my feeling is, if we don't go for this at the moment, as it's not needed at the moment, is it better to wait until we get it right rather than choose and do something that isn't the right solution? That's where I'm sitting at the moment because of that junction. Nothing else, the rest of it is brilliant.
I think it's a case of I don't want to lead the committee. You must vote in the way you wish, but it is one of those things. You won't get the improvement to the junction unless the car park's there.
But there's no room. There's no room to improve the junction. This is where I was open-minded.
Unless the study which Highways are looking at the moment comes up with a solution. I don't know. It might be possible to put a roundabout there. I mean, I don't know. That's something that you'd have a much better idea on.
Thank you, Chair. For fear of repeating myself, and I think I do accept your concerns, Councillor. The junction, or the analysis put forward, and I accept it's not an ideal junction, but it does work, and the proposal does not affect that. It doesn't have a detrimental effect because of the vehicle movements through it are not coincident. So I am unable to object to this application on the grounds of that junction, in terms of capacity and safety. I just want to make that point clear here. I cannot object to it because it will work with the current proposals before you. What we're asking for is improvements to the approach to the bridge, and those will be implemented, and any road safety requirements through the audit will be implemented by us as a council, by us as a highway authority, as it will be a highway authority scheme to amend that highway. So they are the only assurances I can give you as part of this application, that the ramp will be looked at, but not the junction. I want to make that perfectly clear, and so members are not trying to attach something that we cannot attach to this application.
Okay, thanks for that, Tony.
Just a little bit of quick information. There was a bus route, 67 bus, which served Cowent, Sudbrook, Caldecott, through my ward, down to the station, Megan and back as a run round. That fell by the wayside because of funding from the Pasca Transport Unit's ability to continue it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Nobody else has got their hand up. We have a recommendation from officers for approval.
Sorry, Phil.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just before we go to the vote, I noticed that Councillor Graucott, his camera's been off throughout this whole item.
He isn't a planning committee.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, well spotted though. So can I have a proposal that we, Jan? Propose that we approve it. Oh yeah, there was the point on EV charging. Is it the case that we're looking for approval subject to increase EV charges to 10%? Yeah, I getting nods all around the room and on screen.
Are we?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so to be clear, Emma.
Sorry, are we also allowed to approve with the caveat? Sorry, are we allowed to approve with caveats of improving the pedestrian access as well, as a lot of people have, and with possible lighting and improved pedestrian access, as a lot of people have highlighted that as one of the concerns as well.
Yeah, that is part of the road safety audit, so it'll be picked up there. Okay, is anybody prepared to second that? Right, Maureen? Okay, can I have the voting function up, please, Richard? That's with the additional, yeah, the 10% EV charging. Jill?
I can't propose that we reject it on the grounds of that junction, can I?
Yeah, but if we take the vote, if you vote against it, that's exactly the same.
Yeah,
thing.
okay.
So everybody vote no then, please.
So that's been approved.
Okay, thank you, Joe. You again? Yeah, I've got another one come up for against now. Okay, thank you for that, everybody. In that case, we'd now go to the remaining application, which is DM 2021-01735, the retention of the domestic garage at 60 Old Barn Way in Abergavenny. Councillor Grocott wishes to speak, but before I bring you in, Martin, and can you make sure that your camera is on all of the time when you speak? I refer to Amy, who was going to make the presentation.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is application DM 2021-01735 at Old Barn Way. So the application is before members at the request of the local member. So Old Barn Way is located to the north of the main town of Abergavenny, on the opposite side of the road from Abergavenny Leisure Centre. The application relates to the retention of a garage built in the rear garden adjacent to the rear access lane, as it can be seen on the site plan here. So planning permission was granted in 2019 for a garage with dimensions as shown on the slide here. So as approved, it was 6 metres wide by 7 metres in length, a ridge of 4 metres and an eaves height of 2.4. So construction began and the garage has been built as 6.4 metres wide, 7 metres in length, with a ridge height of 5.7 metres and an eaves height of 2.8. The width being 0.4 metres wide and the overall height being 1.7 metres higher than approved. So this can be seen on the next slide. This shows the dimensions and the garage as built. So following negotiation, the application before you proposes a reduction in the built height of 500 millimetres, half a metre, and the retention of the increased width. So the new overall dimensions before you today are 6.4 metres wide, 7 metres long, with a ridge height of 5.2 and an eaves height of 2.3 metres. So this is an increase of 1.2 metres from the approved drawings in height. So the next slide show these dimensions as drawn. So this is, sorry, we're on that side, apologies. So this shows the site plan, the proposed site plan of the garage in the location in relation to number 60 and the neighbours number 58. And again, at the bottom there, you can see the existing garage of number 58 and the proposed garage now of number 60. This is the proposed site plan, again showing the proposals to reduce the overall height of the garage, and note the change in the eaves detail there. As we noted on site this morning, is quite a significant overhang, which was identified by an objection received as well. When the roof is removed and the heights of the walls reduced, the roof will go back on and the overhang is reduced significantly, as shown on the drawing here. So this photograph shows the garage as built but unfinished pending the outcome of this application. This shows the finishing materials, the roofing slate and the stone used as clad into the walls. So the next photograph shows the view looking north towards the garage along the rear access lane and then looking south in the opposite direction. So this next photograph is shown from the main road. showing the lane and the properties of Old Barn Way beyond the trees. And again, this is looking south down that main road. So objections have been received in relation to the design and scale of the building, stating that it's overbearing and out of context. And as a result of the negotiation, the current as-built garage is proposed to be reduced in size by 0.5 metre, so to be 1.2 metres taller than approved. Given the location, the use and the proximity to neighbouring buildings, it's not considered to be overbearing as reduced or affecting privacy of neighbours, given the lack of first floor windows, or incongruous in the overall street scene. The resulting height of the building is considered to be acceptable in design and amenity terms. There's also concerns that the building has a domestic appearance, but the garage, as built, uses a local and natural material suitable within this context. It has a large garage door to the front elevation, which is the public-facing elevation, and a proposed door and window facing into the site to the back of number 60 Barn Way. And the roof lights have been approved as part of the previous application. There are also concerns that the building blocks views. However, the views from the neighbouring properties is not a material consideration, and it's not considered that the height of the building as proposed would have a sufficiently detrimental impact on views along the wider streetscape or townscape context. So as a result, given the proposed changes through negotiation, the application therefore is presented to you for approval subject to the relevant conditions, in particular that the reduction in height will take place within 3 months of the date of any permission granted. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And before I bring the local member in, can you go back to the plan of the existing a minute?
That's as built.
Yeah, that doesn't show the substantial overhang that we've currently got if you go to the photograph. There's a very substantial overhang on that. And if you go to the proposed sketch, again, it doesn't show any overhang, which was of material consideration to the lady next door. So I think that's something we need to particularly watch.
Should I clarify on that point that the proposed plans show no overhang, yeah. So that is what before you today. So when the roof, if approved, the roof would be removed, the heights of the walls reduced, and a new roof will be put on, which should be in compliance with these plans with no overhang. So obviously, if it is built with a larger overhang, we would be addressing that problem. But as you members here, the application before you for your consideration does not include the overhang as you see today.
Okay, thanks for that. I just wanted to clear that up. Martin, Councillor Gorka.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members who came to the site visit this morning and met with two of the very near neighbours. And also thanks to Kate Bingham, the officer who wrote the report for committee. There are a couple of things that I would query about the sketches that you've just seen. The first is that I must speak about the overhang. At the moment, that very considerable roof size drains directly into the next door neighbour's back garden. The sketches you've just seen, the design showed no overhang. But if you also think of the previous design you were shown, in other words, the one that's there now, there was no overhang on that either. And yet there is a very considerable overhang. I also query the arrangements for drainage, because it's a soakaway. There would be along the two long sides of the garage, if it goes ahead, there would be drainage down into a soakaway. And Kate Bingham's report talks about a 10-metre deep soakaway being built. Well, I can see no evidence of a 30-foot hole having been built there, and none of the neighbours can see any evidence of a 30-foot hole having been built there for the soakaway. So I really do worry about the amount of water that would be cascading off and going into neighbours' gardens. I also want to comment about the applicant's comment, and also I think in the reports that you've had, it talks about the letters that the identical letters that I wrote and submitted. I'd like to think I'm a fairly active local councillor in my ward, and what happened here was really quite remarkable in that the whole street affected came together and asked me to go to a meeting in one of their houses. And several of these people are quite elderly. There's one lady who was actually born in the house there and is still there. And these people don't have access to the internet and electronic communication and so on. And so they asked me if I could write a letter that they could all sign. And I hope that explains why it's a common letter. But every single resident, and the applicant is wrong in saying that not every resident has objected. Every single resident on either side has objected, and that all of those objections are on the portal. I would ask that the committee think about precedent being set. Your predecessors in the last council considered an application just a few doors down in Old Barn Way, where it was considered that a building that had been put up without permission and was then subject to retrospective planning permission, just like this one, was unsatisfactory, and that building was removed. Now, in this situation, what happened was, as you've seen, there was an application for what I'd call a normal size garage, one that would just park a couple of cars in it. And everybody found that that was fine. There's no objection at all to that. What was actually then built is monstrous. And I hope that some of those of you who were there this morning will be able to attest to that. It's huge. And so what has now come back to you as the retrospective application is bigger by 40% than the building that got the original permission. Now, call me cynical, but this looks like a very good way of getting around planning law to me, that you get permission for a garage, you then build something which is twice the size, and then get away with something which is only 40% bigger, as some sort of compromise. It is still dramatically bigger than any other garage or building that has been put up in any of the rear gardens there. And you've seen that on the pictures. This is an area where the houses were built without any garages. There was a rear access lane, and over the years, people have put garages there. But nothing that is anywhere near the size, even if the so-called compromise is accepted. I think talking to residents there is room for a compromise here that would not just be a total blot on the landscape of Old Barn Way. And that would be...
You've got 1 minute left,
let
Martin.
the applicant have his garage, but please make it a flat roof. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Officers, do you want to pick up on any of those points before I take members?
Yeah, it might be helpful if we just clarify a couple of those points there. So in relation to the overhang, as we mentioned earlier, the overhang is not shown on the proposed plans that are before you today. So that is not what you would be approving should you want to approve the application. The drainage is a reference to how the drainage is going to be achieved. There will be gutters on either side with downpipes, and the stormwater will be controlled via a 45-gallon storage container at each end of the garage for garden use. The container overflow is to feed into a 3-metre deep soakaway with etc. It's specified on the plans, essentially, exactly how that drainage is going to be dealt with. in terms of 2 gullies at the each end of the drainage pipe. So that is on the plans that are before you today, which form part of an approval, should you wish to approve the plans. In terms of a precedent, it is each case on its own merits. There may have been reasons why garages on other properties along the street were not acceptable or have been acceptable, and they have been approved. It is this application before you today that we are asking you to consider, and the merits of this application. Also, in relation to comments that the application is retrospective, it has been built. Members need to consider this application as if it wasn't there. So are the plans before you suitable or not? Do you think that they are acceptable? And in relation to the compromise, that isn't, again, what's before you today. Members need to make a decision on whether they think it's acceptable, as the plans shown with a pitched roof reduced by ½ a metre in the ridge height and the eaves height. Hope that clarifies those points.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Before we open it up, we've got 2 written statements, one from Mike Turnbull and one from Stephen Bull. So if you'd like to read those, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a statement from a local resident, Mike Turnbull. I write to completely object to the structure proposed in application number DM 2021-01735. The overall proposed size of the structure will be out of scale with buildings in the amenity vicinity, and since this is a retrospective application, my objection is plain to see since the structure now exists. There is an assumption that the structure's dimensions are as indicated on drawing supplied, which I herewith question. I would also point out that these dimensions indicate a structure with internal measurements some 7 metres by 6.4 centimetres. However, since the applicant has decided to add cement render and then clad the building in natural stone some 300 to 400 centimetres thick, the actual external sizes have been exaggerated by another 15 to 20% at least. The original permitted internal measurements were only 6 metres by 7 metres with a height of some 4 metres. Currently standing at some 5.7 metres high, the excessive height of the structure towers over neighbouring buildings, and whilst the applicant applied for a single-storey building, is blatantly obvious that a second floor will be utilised. This is the only logical reason for the acute angle, which has increased the overall internal usable height as opposed to a more obtuse angle, which would have reduced the overall impact of the building. The suggested reduction in overall height of some 400 millimetres is ridiculous. It would appear that the applicant proposes to remove the acute roof trusses, remove a course of blocks, and then replace the acute roof trusses and associated tiles. This will do little to address the imposing visual height and impact of the structure. Submitted drawing 21SB202A indicates the main beam height as 5.2540 metres, but not taking into account the concrete slab that forms the base. This gives a false impression of the measured height. Given the roof area, I am also astonished the original planning was allowed when only a water butt of 45-gallon container at each end. A little online research indicates a roof area of the approximate current size would yield some 126,000 litres of rainwater per annum. I understand drain soakaways some 10 metres deep have now been adopted in March 2020, but would be interested if building control was consulted during the installation to check depth and methods. Was the soakaway 3 metres or 10 metres in depth? I note that Officer Kate Bingham has recommended approval for the application, inciting a mere 1.262 increase in height from the original planning permission in section 1.2. I would also point out this could be expressed as a 34% increase in the height from the original permission granted. Section 6.1.3 refers to other existing garages and outbuildings in the near vicinity to the rear of Old Barn Way. I have measured all and not found one that exceeds 3.5 metres in overall height. Ergo, the proposed altered structure will be more than 75% taller than any other comparables. I object most strongly to approval of this planning application and request the committee reject the application.
Okay, the next one is from the applicant, Stephen Bull.
This on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Stephen Ball. I would like the committee to take into account of the following inaccuracies in the Planning Committee report that Councillor Grocott and objectors have stated, and to note my response on the planning portal site 5.2 neighbour notification. Point 1, the actual stone is 200 millimetres and not 300 to 400 millimetres. Point 2, I understand that there is no maximum size, although there is a minimum as per the Monmouthshire Supplementary Planning Guidance for domestic garages, and therefore each application should be treated on its own merits. The new ridge height proposed would be 5.263 metres and not 5.3 metres. The garage does not block any views as described. Point 5, the application resembles that passed in 2019, a garage with storage. The only difference is the ridge height is higher than that for the permitted outbuilding. Finally, point 6, the committee to note that not every neighbour is affected by the proposed development as described by Councillor Grocott. The next door, numbering number 62, have raised no objections or signed any petition. They have no issue. That is the end of the statement, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Craig. So we'll move on to members now, and the first name is Jane McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Today on our site visit, we looked at things such as the scale, visual impact, and the material characteristics of the building. When you get a retrospective planning application and it's already something that has already been built, it can be quite difficult to visualise the scale of it being reduced. It was handy that Craig was there, Craig O'Connor, the head of planning, with the metre rule so that we could actually sort of see where it should be, and that did help. I do accept that it is a large garage, and this is also acknowledged within the planning report by the planning officer. However, the officer said that in planning terms, it is acceptable in terms of the wider visual impact. It cannot also be seen from the main street. It is screened from the Hereford Road, which we could see today. I do sort of sit on the fence with this one at the moment. So I'm looking forward to hearing the views of other members. I do have concerns that it could set a precedent within the street. And I was also wondering, do we know why the application isn't for the original size that was approved in 2019? So that would be one of my questions. If members do approve the application today, I would like to see a condition that the garage is solely for the purpose of housing cars and storage. I noticed that there's 3 conditions, so this would be a 4th one. And that it should not be let out as a workshop, a general storage, office or residential, and it should solely be for the purpose of the occupant of the property that it is attached to. Thank you.
Yeah, it's auxiliary anyway. It's auxiliary, domestic.
Yeah. Craig, do you just want to clarify that point on?
Oh, sorry, my mic was on. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, on the point with regards to the garage, it's a household planning application, therefore it's for domestic use only, so the only uses that would be acceptable in that garage would be auxiliary to the main house. So that might be, as you mentioned, a private motor vehicle storage, domestic storage. It could be a home office or sort of auxiliary secondary elements to a house like that, but it would be domestic and secondary to the house. So I don't think there's a need for that condition because it is covered implicitly by the fact there's a household application. We could put that on if members wanted, but I don't. It's not needed in this instance because it is only domestic only. If it was used for commercial purposes, if it was rented out with no associated with the house at all, then all of those need planning consent in their own right. So it's domestic auxiliary only. In terms of the comments about why wasn't it built to 4 metres in accordance with approved planning consent, officers don't know. That is the applicant's decision. They've obviously built it larger than what they had planning consent for. I'm not sure of the rationale as to why that was, I'm afraid, but obviously that has been done at their own risk, and members today need to look at it in terms of the approved the plans that have been put forward to you and consider whether those plans are acceptable. If members are minded to agree with officer's recommendation, then obviously the applicant, there is a condition, the applicant has to reduce the roof down by the measurements in the report within the 3 months of planning consent being given. If members aren't of that mind, then they have the old planning consent to fall back on, so it would be reduced down to the 4 metres. So that is sort of the options that are available really to the applicant.
Okay, thanks for that. And Ben?
Thank you, Chair. It was really helpful to go on a site visit today and have a look at this garage. It really is very big, I thought. And what I think is especially disappointing, and that this committee, I suppose, will have to take a view on how it reacts to things like this, is the applicant had planning permission for a 4-metre tall garage. They then decided to build a garage which was nearly 6 metres tall, which has meant it puts us in a difficult position. We have to consider a new application, and it also, I suppose, raises trust issues towards the applicant. And I know when we sit here today, we have to consider this application. But I think it's also worth noting that when behaviour like this occurs, it's distressing not only to the neighbours that a previously agreed plan is not built to, but then that potentially remedial works will then need to take place, causing them further disruption and taking up, you know, even more of their time with noise and building works. So I'm really disappointed that this went ahead. And I think I'm right in saying that the owner and the applicant do not currently live at the house. The house is let. Therefore, I think I understand what you said about the condition, but to take up Jane's point, that my worry would be that a building on this scale would not be used by the person who lives in the house. It would be used by the applicant for external purposes as potentially storage, which I don't think is appropriate. And I also don't think that the height of the building, which is proposed at 5.3 metres or 5.265 metres, if we want to argue over 35 millimetres, I don't think that's appropriate. It looks really out of place compared to all of the garages in the back of that street. So I will advocate for us to not approve this application, and, you know, so the applicant can stick to a 4-metre high garage as was previously approved by this planning committee.
Okay, thanks for that, Ben. Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question of clarity. The officer's recommendation is to approve a reduction in the ridge height by about half a metre. Is that correct? Is the officer's view that that ridge height should be reduced by lowering the walls or lowering the pitch?
So just to clarify, the reduction is in the ridge and the eaves level. So the height of the building overall will come down by half a metre. So it won't be a shallower pitch. The pitch will be maintained.
So the pitch will be retained, but the walls will be dropped down?
Exactly, yeah. The whole roof will come down by half a metre.
So ostensibly, the visual aspect won't change much?
Well, it will change by it being, half a metre lower, yes. So it won't be as tall within that.
Can you put the photograph up?
Yep, 2 secs.
Yeah, if you can see that the stonework stops.
But it'll still have a pretty massive pitch on it. Okay.
Okay, Steve Garrett, Councillor Garrett.
Yeah, apologies I wasn't able to go there today, but my question would be, it's an aggregating factor that this individual has built way beyond what he was allowed to do, and if he can't explain that in the documents he's supplied, I would question, well, why should we approve his plans anyway? And the purpose as well with the Velux windows, it seems to me like there's a domestic, maybe a bit, turning this into some kind of separate accommodation. There's mentioned one of the objections about sewage pipes. I don't know if that was just them saying that might be something that might be forwarded, but is there a risk there that this, and if the applicant doesn't actually live there, is there a further plans he's hoping? And if we approve this, then, we're setting a precedent here. So I would object. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I didn't notice anything on sewage.
No.
It was in one of the ejection documents, and somebody meant there was. It was on the. I'll try. It was on the actual planning portal. I think it was.
As far as I'm aware, there's no foul sewage from
It
the
was a response to the
building.
consultation, and somebody said, would an application for sewage connection at this point in time give concern to the planning authority about the possible intended use of the structure at some time in the future? So I don't know if that's somebody speculating or whether
Unfortunately, that is speculation. It isn't what's in front of us at the moment. Okay. And what is in front of us is basically a householder application in effect, even though, well, actually the owner does own the property. It's just that he rents it out to, the actual house is rented out to somebody else. So this is effectively a householder application. Faye, I noticed that you put your hand up, but you haven't used the hand up function in the thing, so you're not coming up on my list. So if you can, you are now. That's okay. That's fine. Right, Jan Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the comment I want to make, having been there, I think being there makes all the difference. I think the footprint, nobody's really talked much about the footprint. It's a large footprint, and that's the footprint of the interior as I understand it. Is that the normal form that we receive information in? But if you take into account the sort of interior breeze block wall, the gap, and the exterior stones, it's just, it's massive, and it's right on the boundary. I've no idea how the person next door, if they needed to do any maintenance to the side of their garage, would be able to do anything about it. It just seems to me that this person is just pushing the limits, the boundaries of the whole application. And I do worry that if this is accepted and approved, that it will start a trend that others will join in. Just the whole thing just doesn't feel, it's not in the right setting, is my own feeling. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Marion.
Thank you, Chair. It was very imposing when we arrived there today, and it's hard to get an accurate picture of a lower after seeing that. But I guess, we do have to try to get an idea of what it will look like in the reduced state. I would only ask that I looked at the plans for 2019, and it doesn't. The eaves don't show an overhang in that. Can we guarantee that, with the new construction, if approved, that the eaves will be kept to the sides of the wall? But I guess that's probably a building regs issue. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a point all of us have picked up on, isn't it? Okay, thanks for that, Dale.
Thank you, Chair. As a builder by trade, a reduction in the wall height and would be about, they're knocking off 2 blocks. That's 450 millimetres. Which is slightly less than the 500 mil that the officers are suggesting. But you could always change the pitch of the roof as well, which would reduce the height of the ridge line even further. So a reduction in the wall height and a reduction in the pitch of the roof would certainly make it less overbearing and less dominant in its location. There's also another option that you could kind of look at with regards to overhanging of the neighbouring garage, and that is by changing the type of roof that you have on there, as Councillor Grewcott suggested. I'm not a fan of flat roofs, but you could certainly look at something like a pent roof, which only has slates that fall in one direction. So the wall closest to the neighbour could be slightly higher to allow for the fall into the owner's property. Maybe that's something that could be considered too, either changing the style of roof to accommodate the lower ridge line, or reduce the pitch on the apex roof. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dale. Maureen.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at that picture, and just as it is, it looks so easy to put a bedroom in the top there and have a very small living accommodation. I mean, I've seen...
That's not what it's in
I
front
know,
of us.
but it makes it look as though it's too big for a garage. It's more like a house than a garage. That's all it is. I mean, it's the impression it gives. But I think that it's too high. You don't need that height on a garage. So I'm afraid I can't go with it.
Okay, thanks for that. And Faye, you on mute?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry I couldn't make the site visit this morning, but my question was going to be, why did the applicant build a garage so much bigger than the original application was for? So I just wanted to second Councillor Callard's proposal, but I've noted that the applicant asked for 6 months to make the changes rather than 3, so I'd be of a mind to grant them the 6 months, knowing how booked up builders get. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Emma.
Hi, I just had a query. One of the questions raised that there was no maximum height guide to garages. Is that true? That there is no guidance that you can build garages as high as a house?
Yeah, there's no minimum or maximum heights of garages. It is whatever is appropriate within that context. If it was an environment where you had a large house with large grounds, it may be more appropriate or more acceptable to build a larger garage. I think we need to look at this proposal in relation to the street scene and whether members feel that the height of the garage here is acceptable or not. But no, there's no specified guidance.
Okay, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. I'll not take it personally. That's twice now you've missed me, but I'll carry on.
There's all sorts of things going on here. And
it's a delay. I'm joking. It's all good. So on the site visit, it was very imposing, and it was even more imposing because of the perception of the differing heights of the two. Remember, we looked at the windows and one looking into the other, so that it was that much higher than the neighbouring house. And I'm minded to propose and second or third or whatever that we go back to the original planning and that we meet that original planning. Thank you.
Yeah, come on.
Thank you. There was quite a number of questions or points raised in all of those comments, so hopefully I've caught all of them, and I'll quickly run through some responses. So in relation to the use, as Craig specified, it is a householder application, it is a domestic property, so any other use will require planning permission, and then that would be considered on its own merits. But what you have before you is a domestic garage. It is a residential property. The roof lights were mentioned. They were part of the approved scheme previously, so if we were going to go back, if members were minded to go back to that scheme, then they would have roof lights as well on the previous scheme as acceptable. The overhang then has been mentioned in relation to the plans. If I could just draw attention to the plan where it does specify that no part of the development is to project past the boundary line between the properties. And if I can also share with you again the photograph here that shows the overhang on the front as well as the sides. That is not on the plans as proposed before you, so that would need to be removed as well. So the overall length of the roof would be reduced as part of the plans before you for proposal. There's a comment in relation to whether the works to mitigate the harm should be carried out between 3 months and 6 months. It is specified 3 months on the condition on the officer's report. That is considered reasonable, and it is considered necessary to encourage the applicant to comply with any plans that are potentially approved here today. There's also a mention around the footprint. So the footprint is very similar to that has been approved. It is also quite normal for garages to be situated on rear boundaries and quite close to each other. There is a comment in relation to the size of this garage in relation to the next door neighbour's garage, which is a small garage. So you were looking at a small garage in relation to a very large garage. So one looks quite big and one looks quite small. So it's just to bear that in mind when you're considering those two buildings together. And then in relation to the changing the roof pitch, what is before you in front today is the existing roof pitch as built, but reduced as an eaves and ridge height by 0.5 metre. It isn't proposed to change the roof pitch, so that is what is in front of members for your consideration today. I think I've covered all those points. If there anybody else?
Okay, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think there's a lot of imponderables come out this afternoon on this. For example, the pitch, I think, should be looked at. And if you just lower the height of the roof down, you're not doing anything about the overhang. You've also got the overhang over the front of the garage. That might be acceptable in a new light. I noticed that the garage doors are fitted. I think for us to approve this today or to approve the officer's recommendation today, I don't think goes far enough. I think that the comments made by members and officers are such that I think this ought to go back to the builder and talk about comments that Councillor Rook has mentioned about the way the pitch should be to really reduce the height of the building. Because take that pitch down by 2 or 3 feet a metre maybe, you would change the complete outlook of it. And at the same time, you can look at how you deal with the overhang, which I think is a question mark. So I would like to see this sent back and really teased out, to be quite honest. I don't know whether I can make that as a proposal.
Well, that's just the discussion we've been having here while you with. I think the best thing for us to do is to defer it, and the officers have taken a note of all of the points raised. There's still the option, even when it comes back to us, to say go back to the original plan. But let's see what can be brought up in the next 4 weeks. Let's see how many of the recommendations today or the comments today can be accommodated. Let's see what the outcome of that is. So I'm going to propose that we defer it and ask the officers to reconsult with the builder.
I second that, Chair.
And I take it that Tony's seconding that. So Craig, do you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify what the Planning Committee voted on now. So in terms of the overhang, obviously officers have addressed the plans. There is no overhang on the plans that are submitted for consideration. So I just want some clarification in terms of what we're asking of the applicant. Obviously height has been mentioned, so we can certainly ask the applicant to look at height. What I would suggest to Planning Committee members, if you are concerned with the height, I think we need to have a think about, if you are minded to refuse this application, the reasons for that refusal, which I presume from the conversation is visual and it being incongruous to the street scene. Is there a consideration with regards to the amenity of the neighbouring properties? Because what I would suggest to Planning Committee, that we would bring the application back, have those conversations with the applicant, but if the applicant doesn't want to amend the scheme, that we bring the application back with the reason for refusal to be considered by the Planning Committee members. The applicant would have the right of appeal then against that refusal, or they could implement their previous planning consent. So there are options available to the applicant. So what I would suggest is, if you are minded to defer, that we would go back to the applicant, have the conversations with regards to height, which I think is the main concern. If the applicant doesn't want to make that amendment, then we bring the application back with the reason for refusal, which would be visual impact on the street scene.
Yeah, I would be happy with that. Ben, you put your hand up. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, just with regards to going back to the applicant with suggestions. I mean, the applicant already has planning permission to build a garage, which not this exact committee, but the planning committee here has deemed acceptable. So I would suggest that they already know what an acceptable development looks like, because they have permission to build it. It's just not what they chose to build.
Yeah, well, I take that, but let's see what comes out of the negotiations. Quickly, Joe.
Just the same point, really, that should we be negotiating with the builder that hasn't met what's been agreed planning?
We have to.
That's what we're doing, we're negotiating.
We have to. He's the applicant. So, but I think the officers have got the message loud and clear. We'll find out when it comes back.
So what I said was, should we be negotiating with the applicant who has already got planning permission and decided to override it by building a bigger structure?
Well, we have to.
Yeah, with I fully appreciate retrospective planning applications. It's difficult because they have the applicant has implemented a development which they didn't have consent for. I think with retrospective applications, we can't look at it as a sort of a black mark against the applicant because they have constructed the work. The development at the moment is unlawful. We have to consider it in terms of the plans that are in front of us and whether they are acceptable or not. I think from the discussions today, Planning Committee have also got the concerns that the amended height is also too large in terms of the visual impact of that development. So what I'm suggesting to support members is if you are minded to defer it, that we obviously have that opportunity to have that conversation again with the applicant, but it's clear that from the conversations, and I think there has been a motion to defer it, seconded by Councillor Eason, for those conversations to be had. And if those conversations aren't successful and an amended scheme isn't forthcoming, then a reason for refusal will come back to the Planning Committee to take a vote on as to whether that is acceptable. That's what I'm suggesting as a way forward. As you say, Councillor Bond, the applicant and Councillor Callard, the applicant does have a planning consent they can implement and they could amend the scheme to accordingly. But because it is a retrospective planning application, we do have to look at it as to whether it's acceptable or not. It's not, they haven't done anything illegal, there isn't anything inappropriate, it's an unlawful development at the moment. And that's what this planning application is trying to regularise.
Okay, Anne Webb.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as respect for all the objectors, which Martin has said, is the whole street. Why are we allowing this thing to go on and on and on? I mean, they built against planning, the planning that they were given, and I feel strongly that we're being extremely patient with this, and we're setting a precedent, really. I don't know, Craig, if you've got any comments on that, but I think it's going to go on and on to the new year, spring of next year, before it's sorted out with it, and it's just not fair to the neighbours and people living in that area, in my view. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Craig?
Yes, Councillor Webb, in terms of this development proposal, I agree it is ongoing. It's taken some time to get this application to the Planning Committee to consider this application. I guess, instead of setting a precedent, as we know, every application needs to be dealt with on its own individual merits. If the Planning Committee members are not satisfied with this height, then it is certainly within your gift to not allow the development. There is a planning permission being given for this site, which the applicant can implement and have the garage. It's down now to the consideration of this Planning Committee as to whether they feel the height is acceptable or not. Comes apparent from the conversation that we've had that there's not consensus in the room, I don't think. So I think we have to take a vote now in terms of making a decision on this. As you say, Councillor Webb, for the community as well, for local residents, and this matter then can be taken forward. I mean, as I said, if Planning Committee members were minded to refuse, the applicant does have the right of appeal, and then it'll go to the Planning Inspectorate, Planning Environment Decisions Wales, and they will make the final decision as to whether it's acceptable or not.
But in the meantime, the proposal is to go back to the applicant, see if we can get an acceptable solution. There's still the option of refusing. If as Craig said, if the applicant isn't prepared to negotiate down, it will come back to us at the next meeting for refusal.
Should we take it to vote for deferral?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Richard, can we have the vote in...
We don't need to consider delegated, do we, Chair?
No, I think this ought to come back to committee. So can we have it up for...
Excuse me, Chair, do I get my 2 minutes right to conclude?
Well, you pretty well used them, Martin, but come back in for one. I'll be generous.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank members of the committee who I think have seen the issue very clearly. This has been dragging on now for a long, long time. the applicant has permission for a garage that would be in scale with every other garage in the area, and this is a residential application, and yet in that house there is one parent and a child. This is a huge garage. The applicant doesn't live at the house. It's all very suspicious. I would ask members to reject this and go back then to the original planning permission, which nobody objects to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gurkott. But the only proposal we have at the moment is for deferral. So if we have the
yeah, could I substantiate that decision, Chair, that going forward?
Well, should we? Yeah. Should we vote for or against deferral and see what the the results of that are?
If we vote against deferral, does that mean we'll get a chance to approve or reject the planning?
If we go against deferral, we're just stalling it altogether, aren't we?
Because it means we can vote on it now.
We don't know.
Chair, if we go against deferral, does that mean they have to come back with another planning application without negotiation?
We'll just clarify that. If you vote against deferral, we'll have another vote for refusal.
So, yes, so, come in, Chair. So, Councillor Fulmer, Vice Chair, has said that we have motioned that we would have a deferral of this application for the officers to go back and speak to the applicants with regards to the height of the garage. That was seconded by Councillor Easton, I believe, to go back to the developer, look at reducing the height of the building and for that to come back to planning committee. And that is what you're voting on. If you agree that the application should be deferred for those negotiations and conversations to continue, then you would vote for deferral. If you feel that we should be moving in a different direction with this application, then you can vote not to defer, and then another member, planning committee member, would have to make a different motion as to how we take the application forward, which may be to recommend a refusal of the application given the conversations.
We have 10 votes submitted. No, 12. 6. Is that all of us, Joe?
So, approval for deferral.
Yeah.
I think we're okay. That's just okay.
As
15 first time.
Yeah, as there was clarification at the halfway mark, and so literally half of the committee voted after that clarification, and it still went for deferral. I'm happy that the decision was for deferral. So what we'll do now is we'll go back, we'll try and negotiate something far more sensible. If that doesn't take place, the application will come before us again next time with a recommendation for refusal, and then members can make up their minds as to whether they wish to refuse it at that date. But at least we're giving the application one more chance of coming back with something far more acceptable. Okay, well, thanks everybody for that. We do have another item on the agenda now, which is an appeal decision on Lingfield Cottage, 5 Lanes, Cowent.
Yep.
Are you doing that one as well, Amy?
Yeah.
Bear with me just a second. When you put it on presentation, it takes you back to the very beginning. So this application was for a carport and an annex in an outbuilding, an extension to the outbuilding to form an annex at Lingfield, 5 Lanes, Cowent. So you can see the property identified there in the red line boundary. The outbuilding and carport will be situated along this side of the boundary here. So the cottage up here, this is the proposed outbuilding to be enlarged, and existing outbuilding with attached carport. It was a split decision where the carport was considered acceptable, but officers refused the application for the enlargement of the outbuilding to form an annex. So these are the proposed elevations. It would be to increase it to a 2-storey building with gabled dormers and cladding, slate cladding with quite domestic appearance in it. The officers considered the size to be too large for the annex and unnecessary, and also for the external appearance to have a detrimental impact on the character of the area. There you can see the outbuilding in question, the rendered building with a concrete tile roof. The existing timber clad with a corrugated sheet roof was to remain as existing. The carport is located down here. As I said, the carport was considered acceptable and not mentioned, not a reason for refusal as part of the application. There's a proposed carport. So if I go back to this drawing, the inspector agreed, dismissed the appeal on the basis that the scale and the details as such of the dormer windows and the very domestic appearance was, in his words, discordant and incongruous in the appearance and the character of the area, and supported officers' decision in terms of the refusal. There was also a lack of information in terms of biodiversity. There was no assessment of protected species within the existing building or any enhancements identified on the plans. So the inspector agreed that, again, that was a reason to refuse the application based on that lack of information. So fully supported officers in their recommendation in that respect. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So that one was just for information. It's always worth looking at those. It gives us an idea as to how the inspectors think when we're considering applications, because we always have to think, if we turn somebody down, and that's within our gift to do it, what will the results of the appeal be? So it's always good to know the inspectors are thinking along the same lines as we are. So with that, that's the end of the meeting. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.
See you, folks, those online.